Hi, it can happen to the savviest celeb and to the highest paid influencers. So why do they screw up on social media? Why do they get it so wrong? Why do they fail to read the room? Let's start with the wrong answer first. No, it's not a publicity stunt because they lose followers, and followers are like gold, and the last thing a celeb or a influencer wants to do is to lose followers. But they regularly do things, say things, behave in certain ways that make them lose followers. So what drives that? Is it self-sabotage at the best, or is it completely and utterly ridiculous at the worst? But the reason why celebrities and influencers screw up on the platforms that they depend on to raise their profile and to maintain their presence in the public eye is so much more interesting than just a PR stunt. It's a primeval drive. It's something that they can't control and something that they are perhaps unaware of or unable to overcome. So keep watching to find out what's the human urges that drives this behavior. So celebs and influencers who screw up on their social media are not even small fry. They're big names. They're people with tens of thousands of followers. They are very big names who should know better. And seriously, they really should know better. But I'll come back to Insta royalty later and look at some of how the other influencers get things wrong and take a misstep. Take your mind back to the beginning of lockdown, the beginning of the pandemic, when we were all made to socially isolate, stay at home, weren't allowed to go anywhere, one trip out a day, socially distancing, all of that pressure, all of those restrictions. That was the spur for a whole bunch of influencers, many of whom were ex-Love Islanders, to decide that they should go and work abroad, somewhere hot and exotic, while the rest of us weren't even allowed outside of our own gardens. And you weren't even allowed to sit on a park bench, actually, if you remember back. They were all roped off. And you could, if you did, you could have the strong arm on the law threatening you with fines or sanctions of some kind. And it was a really serious time. Their fan base, the influencers that went to Bahrain and different exotic places, were really furious that the influencers felt they could leave Plague Island, just jump ship, go somewhere much easier where life was easier, and leave the rest of us all behind. And they unfollowed in their droves. So what was their thinking? What was the thinking behind their action that made them think that this was okay? And if by some miracle you missed Kim Kardashian's latest comments, the remarks that she was rebuked for, the insensitive comments claimed in an interview for Variety, when she stated that no one wants to work. She didn't just say it like that, no one wants to work. She said, no one wants to work. And she underlined that with, what women in business need to do is effing get up off their asses and just get on with work, get on with work. So her comments went down really badly with a whole bunch of her loyal female fan base who juggle childcare and demanding careers without the benefit of 24/7 nannies and immense wealth. So that was another, massive misstep. Molly Mae Hughes, ex-Love Islander, net worth at 22 years of age around 2 million sterling. She recently rocked her fan base again around the concept of work, when she implied collectively, individually, we have the same 24 hours in the day that she has. And the implication was, if you're not as successful as her, as rich as her, as beautiful as her, then that's your fault. And again, that went down really badly with her fan base. So we understand now that these comments are not publicity stunts because they work counter to what they would ever wish for. But in a way, when these influencers say these comments, they are heartfelt comments. They really believe these things. And that's a sign that they've become completely isolated from their fan base. It feels as if this is a trajectory that is really hard to avoid and will eventually cause glitches for some, or complete kind of downfall for others, of some of our most popular celebrities and influencers by their behavior and what they say. So, what happens? What is the dynamic that pushes this behavior? What have we got to learn from this? So, firstly, privilege. Privilege becomes so taken for granted by some celebs and influencers that they no longer feel privileged. It's shifted. Into the realm of it moves into the realm of entitlement. They feel entitled. It becomes their normal, their new normal. It becomes a part of who they are, and they don't see it anymore as privilege. They just see and feel that they are entitled. And the problem with feeling entitled is that it is only one small step away from hubris. Now, hubris is a really interesting concept, and it's a word that's not used enough these days. And so I want to reintroduce it as a concept here today. Hubris means feeling that you are bigger than the gods, more important than the gods, more powerful than the gods. And when you're thinking of yourself as bigger than gods, imagine you become so rich, so powerful, so cosseted that you become a victim of hubris. And it is only those who believe they are bigger than the gods that would say to others, mere mortals, that you could be as rich and as influential as they are if we only put in the work. And there is another key trait that plays into the concept of hubris, and that's with celebs and their behaviors and what they say, and that is they believe their own publicity. They believe their own PR. They've talked themselves up. They've tooted their own horn. They've maybe even inflated some of their accomplishments. And what that's all okay. That comes with the game. That comes with what they have to do. But starting to believe your own PR is a mistake. What celebs and influencers forget is that when they post a picture, for instance, it's 125th of a second. That's a shutter speed, 125th of a second. And we know that some pictures take days, hours to curate, to compose, to make. But it's still, finally, that image is 125th of a second. And that's all it is. But believing that that image can represent a whole life creates a simplified sense of self, a one-dimensional persona. And the truth is far more complex than that. The problem is when people on social media begin to believe and identify that they are this simplified version of themselves, that they can achieve anything they want, and the rest of us are just lazier or less talented or inferior in some way to them, or that we simply don't work hard enough, that means that they have completely taken on board and believe their own publicity. A simplified self finds it hard to feel or even find empathy for anyone else, which adds another layer to their isolation, within their own bubble of privilege. They can no longer acknowledge their own messy thoughts, their own messy emotions. And when they're no longer in touch with their own messy emotions and they're denying any kind of doubt, self-doubt, self-limitations, anything at all, anything around human nature, then anything about them being flawed or that they're just doing their best, they begin to blame everyone else for not being as successful, rich, or as beautiful as they are. Real life requires a much more nuanced approach. It's more complex than they want it to be for us. All human beings are flawed human beings, and we even have to embrace the idea and maybe the reality of failure. And it's without this nuanced understanding of what human nature is that the false self eventually becomes their whole self. It becomes more and more isolated from their authentic self until they're just left with this one-dimensional sense of self with no authenticity at all. Everything then becomes a construct. Everything then becomes a performance. That's why they fail to read the room. That's why they fail to care about the impact what they say and what they do has on their followers and on their fan base. They are deluded because they believe that they are bigger than the gods.